My name is Mara Bentley, and I'm the conduct officer for the Alexandria campus. So I'm Steven at the Alexandria campus, and we are becoming One Nova. This is our first college-wide training. So some of my live streaming this. So some of my people will be online able to hear the presentation while you all are physically here. So we thought that was kind of cool that we could do that. If you have cell phones or anything that makes noise, could be jingly, if you could silence it, just so it would not be a distraction for those who are on the other side of the computer listening. Are we live right now?
We're live.
Okay, we're live. Are we in test?
No, we're in there.
Okay, cool.
We're where we should be. This is what the people in mind see.
Okay. So I'll be giving some housekeeping information for the people online, and you'll know when we start the presentation when the screen moves. If you guys have questions, please feel free to raise your hand while we're going through the various topics. We will answer them. The people online can hear your questions. They will ask us questions in writing. And when we get the questions in writing, we will say them out loud so you all can see what they're asking, okay? So for those who are online, you will be able to ask questions in the on the right-hand side of your screen. You will see that there are emoji icons, so that the location with the emoji icons is where you would present your questions to us. Some of the process that you will see today will be new to you because Stephen and we did work together to try to combine what I do at the Alexandria campus, what he does here, to kind of make it one process. But I will say that it has been approved. So none of this is unapproved. All has been approved by the Dean of Students Council. Let's see. You will notice that the presentation today is outlined with day 1, day 2, and then we'll go over the training forms. That's just because we're giving this presentation in different formats. Today is the 2.5-hour format, but next week or the first week in October, we will break it down into 3 1-hour training days for those that prefer that. Ignore the day 1, day 2 headers should you see them, okay? So that's it, I too. Okay, so the student conduct mission, of course, we focus on student safety and developing a supportive environment for those that come before us. We want to make sure that even though students come before us and they make mistakes, we want to constantly send the message in different ways that we are here to help them to grow and develop. We all make mistakes, and just because they're in front of us, it doesn't mean that we cannot provide adequate support. I always stress that we are not a solely punitive unit. So if you're thinking is to give the most harshest consequence, I want you to, I challenge you to rethink how you see your position on the panel. Instead of thinking anything in a punitive nature, we're really here to help develop our students. Okay, and that's everybody's role in this process. We're so developmental that we shape our presentations, everything that we do under Aston's model of student involvement and engagement. And I think it would, to give a historical perspective, we actually developed this about 1.5 years ago before we started concept, before we started thinking about student engagement. But we know in higher education, students who are highly engaged are successful students and graduated students. And just because we're dealing with students who tend not to make the best decisions does not mean we don't want them to be successful. So even in what we do, we do. We want to come from a student engagement model, especially in the sanctioning process, and we will get to that. But we kind of want to start thinking about how we as panel members who are making serious decisions about our students' future can look at it from more of an engagement standpoint. What can we do to connect our students? Our data shows that the students that come before us to any clubs and organizations, they don't know where the resources are for tutoring and other academic assistance. They don't know who their advisors are. So even in our role of individuals giving out consequences and sanctions, we want to make sure that they walk away knowing the right information, okay, to reduce the likelihood that they will come back before us. Any questions about that? No? We have a strategic plan for what it is that we do. These bullets that you see here, Stephen and I share these initiatives. We can add to make our own process unique for our campus and the needs of our students, but these initiatives are shared. So we want to improve the office connection. There's no way that we can connect a student if we don't know what the resources are on the campus. So we look at all resources on campus, from on my campus, the Academic Success Center, to our Learning and Technology Center for Students that provides free services with the most up-to-date technology services. We always want to incorporate assessment and evaluation this year. We would like to see the progress of our students, their opinion on how we're doing, and if there's anything we can do to improve our processes. Always implement education and outreach initiatives. We go into the SOAR, which is the orientation for first-year students. We go into SDV classes and other classes to do presentations related to student conduct. And then we do other types of campus-wide initiatives. I know on the Alexandria campus, we have the Sexual Assault and Peer Education program that is out of my office. So our students go across the campus and educate in various ways about sexual assault and preventing those incidents on campus. And increasing the use of technology, we're demonstrating that today by live streaming this training. So we want to try to use it as best possible, even in our communication with students. We certainly want to make sure that we can incorporate. Any questions? Good stuff, bad stuff, need improvement? Okay. So what are our students doing? Everything. And that's okay. That's okay. That's why we're here, you know, to really help them to grow and develop. And student services, of course, has always been about, you know, the development of students, but we want the message to permeate all divisions, you know, so we work with faculty, staff, and students in helping them to understand this philosophy and how faculty and staff should be embracing this philosophy so that we can reduce some of the problems that we see on campus. There's no way that student conduct can do it by ourselves. So we try to work with everyone possible. Any questions? So you guys know that Nova Cares and student conduct operate separate, but sometimes together. So some of the cases that you may hear may also be shared with the Nova Cares office. It may have identified other problems and concerns outside of the conduct process. But as conduct officers, hearing officers, we don't consider that information. Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure what I'm looking at here. Is this percentage of all the cases you see, what percentage are in these categories, and is this over an academic year?
Yes, it's over an academic year, and I can tell you Monica Chenault, who is the person who vets all of the incident reports that are created, she came out with new data yesterday. So we need to update our data. So this data was from a year and a half ago when we developed the presentation. And a percentage, 35% of our cases were for the NovaCares, or the students who had some mental health concerns, or they have family problems, other problems outside of the academic environment that could impact their success here. So a large percentage of our cases were NovaCares cases. Now, when you look at the conduct cases, these are cases solely in conduct. But when I looked at the data, a lot of the students in our category were also in the NovaCares category, the behavioral concerns category. So we share a lot of the same students. So as we think about providing assistance, we need to be thinking about it beyond just the student's mistake and what's going on. We really need to be looking at it from how we can help the student to be successful through the student conduct process, through the hearing process, how we ask questions, the timing of the questions, how we answer questions, those primary engagement factors.
So these are NovaCare reports then?
In the behavioral concerns section, yes. And the conduct and criminal?
60% of all of the NovaCares reports were?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. That's actually a lot.
Well, and it's changed a little bit. The number has gone up.
Okay.
It's definitely increased across all campuses. I wish we could have gotten some of that information a little bit earlier. We could have put it in here, but going forward, now that it came out yesterday, we will be able to share. I believe we have over 1,300 cases submitted over the last year across all campuses. And over half of them were conduct-related cases. So we have a lot of work to do. We can certainly make an impact, definitely, with the number of concerns that are coming across our desks. So just kind of how we operate is very important. I think that's the message I want to bring home. How we operate, how we interact with the students that come before us in the conduct panel is very important. And we want to make sure that we are positively engaging our students in that process. Okay? Any other questions? So how are cases managed? Of course, when we hear cases, go-to first are the policies and procedures that are outlined in the student handbook. How many of you all have read the student handbook? But at least you know we have one. You know it's online. It's no longer printed in a hard copy, but it's accessible online. And I always say the best way to access the student handbook is to go to NOVA's web homepage and in the search engine type in student handbook, because the web page is always updated and the link to the student handbook always changes. In that handbook, we outline student rights and responsibilities. We always want to respect that. Always want to make sure that students know we know what they are and that we respect them as contributing students of this community. Of course, the student conduct processes, those are outlined in the student handbook. We do have core values, and because we're moving in the One Nova direction, we want to make sure that we're streamlining everything across campuses so that we're all doing it the same way. Any questions? No? Okay. So what happens when students get caught? It is reported. In order for our office to really take any type of action, we have to receive a report. So a lot of times we're hearing, a lot of times incidents are occurring on campus that are not reported. And we never get involved in repeat behaviors. So the incident absolutely has to be reported. We urge use the NovaCares reporting form. Does everyone know about the NovaCares reporting form? Okay. We urge people to use that, but that is not the only avenue in which a person can report something. You can, of course, use the campus police avenue, student services, faculty, staff, anybody that works here that the student feels comfortable reporting to. We certainly encourage that. It eventually makes it back to our office. But what we do say is that the incident reporting form online is the quickest way to our office. It's sent to the Dean of Students office electronically, Monica Chenault. She is the person responsible for managing all of the incident reports that come in. The student is contacted for a preliminary meeting, and we always tell the student that we contact them through their NVCC email. So I always encourage the students to make sure that their email is working, number one, and that they're checking it, because them not getting the letter does not negate the fact that they need to be a part of the hearing process. We begin the investigation process. We work with whoever we can work with to get a better understanding of what has taken place. So by the time you get information, we have already done the investigation. So everything that you have is from the investigation process. Yes.
This slide, what happens when students get caught, made me think about the police. What happens when a student, it's not going through NovaCares, but there's an incident, the police get involved. Do they tell you? Does that go to the student's record? What's the connection between what happens with law enforcement and us?
That's a great question, and the answer is it depends. So if it's a criminal offense and campus police are involved, they take the lead on that, and we may or may not get a report right away on it. The criminal part with the culture of how Nova works has to be completed first. And we've learned that with our process, we can compromise the outcome of a criminal case. So we don't always want to operate together. So they decide based on the severity of the case and what that case will look like criminally, whether or not we get a copy of what they have right away. Sometimes we do have to wait. Sometimes it's not a severe criminal case where we can operate simultaneously. There's the legal side, the legal element that the student will have to go to court, and then there's our element that the student will have to fulfill as well. Sometimes campus police says, it's not a criminal issue at all. This is solely conduct, and we're going to remove ourselves. Okay. Any other questions about that? No? Okay. So the hearing takes place, and of course, this is where you all come in. If the student decides that they want a formal panel hearing, we assemble you all to hear a particular case. And for every case that we assemble, we give you the adequate information that you need to make a decision. And we will go over some of the forms and the information that you will receive in every case. Since are you all familiar with the NovaCares form? Okay. Okay. So with the NovaCares form, you of course can go directly to this link and it will populate the electronic form. This is the critical element here. If you all are ever having to write a report, the piece that's very important is always including the 5 W's and the 1 H. And on the form now, it even highlights the 5 W's and the 1 H. So if you ever have to fill out the form, it does have that as kind of like a cue. So the 5 W's and the 1 H, they are who, what, when, where, why, and how. So as hearing officers, that's so important to us. We always, when I go out and do these educational workshops, I always say, you know, that's the information we need. We don't need your assessment. We don't need your opinion. And we certainly don't need any type of evaluation of the situation. We simply just need the facts. And the reason I say that is because students can come and ask to see all that we get to see. Okay, so we don't want the information to be harmful to the student, and we certainly don't want them to see us as negative individuals on campus. So while we may have to write a student up or report a student, how we report the student still could impact the positive engagement that we have with the student. Does everyone understand what I'm saying? So we need to be thinking about, always thinking about, how will this impact that I could be developing with the student through this process? Okay.
Cynthia has a question about the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes, FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. Students can request, our student handbook said that they can request information in their educational record and they have the right to review it, the information in there. And the FOIA Act, which is a federal act, says that we have to see the information. So that's why I always say it's very critical that we watch what we say and how we say it in writing and verbally. Because, you know, the panel hearings are audio recorded and the recordings are part of the FOIA process. Okay, should it be requested. So we always want to make sure that we are positively engaging our students. Okay, any other questions? Okay. The electronic report, I think we all kind of know how this process works. Once it goes to Monica, Monica then sends it out to the various offices. If it's a behavioral concern and not a conduct report, she'll send it to the care team on each on the respective campus. If it's a student conduct issue, she will send it to the appropriate conduct officer for the campus. Let's see. So the investigation, again, I think I talked about this a little bit already in the previous slide. I get a lot of questions regarding how long does an investigation take, and it's a varying range. Some of them are very short, depending on the incident, and some of them take a very long time to gather the information. Sometimes the most difficult part is getting in touch with the person reporting the incident. Because a lot of times, just in my experience with working with students here, they want to report and be done with it. Sometimes when they report from their own experience in the incident, but as the reader of the incident report, I may have more questions to help us better say whether or not a violation has occurred. So contacting them, making sure that the numbers are right in the Maxient, the telephone number is right in the Maxient system, making sure that they check their emails frequently. So sometimes just the contact process holds up the investigation process, but we try hard to get in touch with them. We even go some intrusive routes by going to the classroom as necessary, talking with the appropriate faculty members, maybe having to pull the student out of class to get the information that we need with the case. Okay. Any questions about the investigation portion? No, we're good? Okay. Hearing options. You all know we have 2 hearing options. of our cases go through the informal hearing process, and that's where Stephen and I individually meet with the student, have an informal conversation, and we do our best to resolve the case that route. But where you all come in is the formal process, and there are two formal processes. Some students might say, I don't want staff to be aware of what I've done, just for whatever personal reason they have. And they may request a formal administrative hearing that is audio recorded. And that is where Stephen and I individually meet with the student, but it's on audio record. Okay. If a student says, I would rather have more people involved in the decision-making process, that's where we pull together the student conduct panel to hear a case. How many of you have heard a case so far? Okay, about half of you. Good. Okay, so hopefully the other half of you will have an opportunity to hear a case and get the experience. For those of you who have heard cases, can you share a little bit about your experience? The good, the bad, and the ugly?
Question here is, what if a student doesn't respond?
Good question. Can I answer that question before? If a student doesn't respond to our initiatives of contacting them, we move forward in their absence. But we do all that we can to make contact with the student. We will move forward. And what student are they talking about? Are they talking about the complainant or the respondent?
I think it was respondent, is why you're talking about respondent.
Okay. Yeah, so if the respondent or the person being accused does not respond to our attempts to contact, we move forward. Sometimes the complainant or the person reporting the incident will say, you know what, never mind, I don't want to have a conduct hearing. We will respect that and we will halt the process, and we will work with that student in terms of how to deal with whatever the situation is that was of concern.
So we're gonna treat the situation as in moving forward. We're not gonna have the hearing part.
Say that one more time.
So when you say the student didn't respond, which is the one who is being accused.
Yeah.
Didn't respond to the panel, which is gonna go forward and have the
Yeah.
treatment for that case.
Yeah, you will move forward as a hearing panel in the absence of the student, and you will look at the written evidence that you have in making the best decision possible. Mhm. So experience for those who have heard cases. Experience.
So I've done more than I care to talk about. I will say it's a very, you're very nervous when you do it at first, because some of these are pretty serious. And you recognize that what you're looking at, can really have an effect on a person. But I will say that your office makes it as easy as possible. They really guide you through. They've got the forms there, and so scripts.
Yeah.
And so you're not really hanging out there on your own. And more responsibility is given to the chair than to the other panel. A good chair is always good to have. So you can lean on the chair of the panel, which is good.
Yeah, and everyone, and I'm so glad you said that, because everyone in this going forward, everyone in the hearing panel process will have a role. So this year, you're not just going to show up to listen and help make a decision. You're going to have an active role in the panel process. Okay, and we'll review what those roles are.
If the person who did report and he just didn't report what happened in the incident, and when we contact them, they don't respond. We don't have any data. Are we gonna pull that person from their class and say, hey, we're gonna have a couple questions? Awkward?
So just to make sure I understand, there's someone being accused. We don't have enough information to say whether or not there should be a hearing.
No, I'm saying like, for example, I saw an incident over there
Mm-hmm.
and I would like to report it because it is serious.
Yeah.
Then I put what I saw,
Mhm.
facts and all that stuff,
Mhm.
all that stuff, and then I submit it.
Yeah.
Then my job is done. Then you come back and ask about for more information.
Yeah.
I did not respond. What would be the process?
We would have to, as individuals reviewing the information before assembling a committee, determine whether or not we have enough to even have a hearing. And we always, and I always tell people, when you report something, you do have the ability to have an anonymous report. You can just leave your name out, and that's just your sign to us saying, hey, I'm doing my part, I'm reporting what I saw, I want you all to handle it. But like I said, sometimes as the reader, we don't always, I'm reading it from the student handbook perspective. What are the possible violations that I'm reading here? And I don't always have enough information. So I always discourage anonymous reporting, and I always encourage contact information so that we can figure out what happened, so that there's a clear understanding of what has happened. But you're right, some people don't want to respond beyond submitting the written report. That really hasn't been too much my experience. Has that been your experience a lot, would you say?
It's 50-50. But generally, if we have more than enough evidence to go forward, we go forward. And if not, we have educational talk with them. And if the issue comes up again, then we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah.
That's for the first part. The second part is basically, so the incident was serious. That reporter didn't want to give you more data. Are you gonna go to that person and pull it from the class?
Oh, yeah. We will go every avenue possible to figure out what happened. And if the report especially tells us the location and we have video camera, we immediately could go to campus police and say, hey, this is the time frame that this has happened. Can you pull this video so we can see? So we don't always need just one angle. I mean, any angle we can get the information in an integral manner, that's what we'll do. Okay? So we do really work hard so that you all can only just sit and read and hear and do the rest of the, okay?
Then what would happen to that person?
Which person?
The one that did an incident?
You all would help us decide
And
what
not
happened.
the decision. How do we add to board that person in order to get the data from them? Why did they did that? What is the reason like that?
Okay.
Because I think there's some confusion, because I think your office takes care of all that.
The
So,
investigation.
Yeah, so we wouldn't worry about that. We wouldn't pull them from class, like you guys would take
Yeah.
care of that. We would just show up for the hearing.
And review
Yeah,
what we've provided to you, what we've been able to collect, all of the evidence and information. And your job would be to hear what the student in front of you is saying and make sense of all of it. Yeah.
and then if for some reason they don't show up, we still go forward with the hearing, right?
Based on, yes,
But it's
exactly.
not our responsibility to track them down.
No,
So-
it's not your responsibility. In fact, you're not going to know who to track down until for the hearing is there. So you will know what you encourage yours 30 minutes before the hearing?
Yeah.
To attend, you will know 30 minutes before the hearing who is involved in the case.
Basically, all the work's done for you. All you do is show up, you read, and you make a decision. It's nice and easy.
You read, you hear, you read, you hear, and Steve and I, we joke all the time. There is the male perspective and there's the female perspective. And that's why we work so well together, because he's the bigger picture, I'm the details. So yes, you read and you do the best you can to make a good decision. Okay?
Easy.
Okay, so the students are emailed the disposition. So once you all decide what would be best for the student, you would give that information to us. And we would make sure that the student gets the outcome. Now, sometimes I will say this, sometimes 99% of the time, we will support your decisions. But I've been doing student conduct for about 10 years. And I've seen some decisions that have been way off. I mean, not in line with the policy, not really considering what has taken place, adding some other stuff that you shouldn't be considering. And for the purposes of integrity, we may not go with that decision. Okay, we may have to make another decision that we think is best. But because we have assembled a panel of individuals, because we really do believe that you all are capable of making the best decision possible. And there's never a right or wrong decision. Take 3 people who hear the case and you take 3 more people who hear the same case, they may come up with 2 separate outcomes. And that's okay, as long as the evidence has been considered, the facts have been considered, and together as a group, you made the best decision possible. Let's see. Cynthia said, I will have an offline question at some point. Okay, no problem, Cynthia. Okay. Just a review of the points we really want to bring home, that everything we do is centered around student involvement and engagement, and it starts our thinking when we read the material and our interaction with the student when they come before us. How we ask our questions, how we respond to their questions. We just have to be very mindful. Goal is not to be adversarial, but to in every way show them that we are here to help support and help them to grow and develop. Okay? The student conduct process is guided by the student handbook. You make a decision based on the policies already written in the student handbook, not your experience in hearing other types of cases, not any type of legal circumstances. It's just based on the policies and procedures in the handbook. There are several types of hearings, but we classify them in 2 ways, formal and informal. You all are a part of the formal hearing process, and student email is our primary mode of communication. So I share all of this with you because if you do have interactions with students throughout your day, making sure that you have conversations about, hey, are you checking your email? Does your email work? Those types of things, because not just conduct information is sent to them through that medium. Other important information is sent to them through that medium. Any question? Okay, 2 questions.
So let's say a student wants to be anonymous. So they send an email from like their personal email. Would you guys even receive it, or would it kind of like accept outside email address?
Oh, no. The preferred method is through the NovaCares reporting form, but we will accept it in other ways also. So if it's an anonymous email and they send it email address, I'm going to be like, hi, thank you for sending this information. I have a few more questions for you. Yeah. You don't have to identify your name, but please answer the questions. Yeah. And I've gotten a couple of cases like that.
You mentioned that people don't they want to just send it and they don't want to be identified. So be away from the 15 contacts without being identified.
Yeah, some people choose that, but I will still attempt what we do. And if they respond, that's great. If they don't, we do the best we can to move the case forward. And if we can't move the case forward, we just can't move it forward. Okay.
My question was, between the formal and the informal, you say informal is much more frequent, but what's the ratio, would you say?
For this last year, I need to do my statistics for this year, but I would say 90% of my cases are informal. In book, we say we try our best to resolve the cases from the informal perspective as much as possible. And if we can't resolve it from the informal perspective, it then goes to the formal hearing process.
Maybe you're going to cover this yet, but at what point does what is done go on to a student's permanent record?
An educational record is created once we have a responsible finding. If there's a not responsible finding, the educational record is supposed to be deleted out of the system within 30 days. That's our policy. So once it's a responsible finding, that record is there. We have it for at least 7 years. Expulsion records, of course, we have to have longer, because if we get rid of it in 7 years, we won't know if the student was expelled from the institution. And technically, they could reapply and become students again. So, but our policy says that for most of the records that we keep in student conduct is 7 years.
And then does that, if the student has asked the next institution to have their transcript sent, does that automatically go to the next institution?
No, that's a really good question. Some institutions care about behave while they were here before going to the new institution, and they will send us a dean's report form, and they will ask us, does the student have any type of disciplinary record? If they do, what's in the record, and they'll give us an opportunity to explain, to give like a short summary. Some institutions don't send anything at all, and they go from here to tuition. Yeah.
About how long is the case?
You mean a panel that you might sit on?
Yeah.
It just depends on the type of case. Here, I can say I've worked at 4 institutions, and we've had cases that have gone 4 and 5 hours. But those panel members did not mind staying that long. Here, what would you say your longest?
We usually keep within 2.5 hours, so you have 30 minutes to figure out what's going on, an hour and some change of actual hearing time, and then you have 30 minutes or so to discuss, to make a recommendation.
And for those who have served on the panel, how long would you say your hearing was for that? Okay, so about 2
The more
hours.
serious the concern, the longer it takes.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any other questions?
And then the chairperson usually has to do the report.
Mm-hmm. A wonderful report.
Warning you all.
Yeah, so whoever is identified as the person to write up the final report. And you'll have about it varies, based on the Dean of Students' office and preference. But for the sake of training purposes, we do say usually within 72 hours that after you ended the hearing, that you submit the report to our office for review. Okay? Questions?
So for our part, when we share the hearing panel, you said you're gonna write a report, right?
Mm-hmm. You mean the summary report?
Yeah.
Yes. If you're
Or what?
one person on the panel would be responsible for completing that. Person would submit the report to our office.
So you're
for
gonna
review.
assign one person to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And that report is, I wouldn't say extensive, but it is detailed. It talks about how many people were in agreement with this because it is majority rules. So you get to identify, you get to tell us essentially what happened in the hearing if we're absent from it.
And just to comment, and maybe you had it in the slide that I missed because I was late. Anybody on the panel has to remember that what goes on in the panel stays in that room, that there needs to be total.
Yes, it's, well, you know, we certainly would expect to hear a case, you leave that information there. And it's oftentimes so tempting to talk about a case because sometimes the student that comes before us is not just a problem in one class. Sometimes they're a problem in multiple classes. And faculty and staff oftentimes talk, but it is not your responsibility or job to share what's going on with the student should the student reveal that information to us in a process. Okay? So in fact, you are obligated and you will have to sign a confidentiality form not to share what has happened in the hearing process. Okay? So that's a very good point. Thank you for that. Okay. Here's up.
All right, let's see what happens. Let's give Miroa a round of applause.
Thank you.
As we transition here. And the attendance should be going around. And so if you have not signed that, I recommend you do so, unless you want to, and I don't know how many of you guys want to necessarily do it again. All right, day 2, understanding your role. And so we're going to talk about that. It makes me think, you know, first rule of Fight Club is what?
Don't talk about Fight Club.
Don't talk about Fight Club. All right, that's what this is like. All right, so let's talk about what's your role as a faculty, staff, and student when it comes to sitting on a formal panel. As we talked about earlier, some of you have sat on panels before, and some of you have sat on panels since I've been here. And so you've seen some of the changes that we've done at NOVA over the years when it comes to the conduct process. Great news is this. I hear I talk too fast. I'm trying to slow it down. The great news is this. The way that we do the panel, if you sat on it in the last year, that hasn't changed. That is different is some of the forms. So you're really going to pay attention to the next half. But if you've sat on a panel before, a lot of this is going to be just a good reminder for you. And you're like, yeah, I've seen that somewhere. So that's a good thing. We want to talk about just some of the basics. Your attitude sets the tone for the hearing. And so especially if you are the chairperson, remember, all of the people you're going to see are our students. And I like to say it this way. They are all our students. So the student who's being accused of violating the code of conduct, they're our student. The student who is accusing the person violating code of conduct, the complainant, they're both our students. Let's make sure that we treat both of them with respect, that we treat both of them fairly. They should have that feeling as, okay, I'm going in here, I'm going to talk about this incident, and they feel that you're going to give them a fair shake. And that starts from day one. That starts from when you meet them. Hi, I'm Mr. So-and-so, I'm Ms. So-and-so. We're going to start this meeting in just a moment. So they have this idea. So just make sure you're aware of that. I would encourage you to be on time. That's why if you serve on a panel here at Annandale, we have for all of our panel members to come 30 minutes before hearing. We try to do that generally between 30 to 15 minutes before. But that's so you get to know one another over the paperwork. So it's like when I said earlier, oh, no problem. We give you all the stuff you need. Yeah, you know, it's halfway true. You know, it's an art and it's a science. Okay, so we give you the science part of it of here's all the stuff you're going to look at is what happens inside that 2 hours. And so what we want you to do, we want you to be so prepared that you get some of that nervousness out. I don't know about you, but if I get nervous, I start doing this. You know, I rub my hands against my pants. I want to make sure you have time to get those jitters out, time to go to the restroom before the meeting, so that when a student comes, you're not messing around with papers. You're ready to rock and roll. You're ready to go. And so we encourage you to be on time. It's only to serve you and to best serve our students. Confidentiality, we've talked about that. It's required. Professionally, I even encourage the students before they come in, dress professionally. It's interesting the type of treatment you get when you show you have respect for yourself. The type of treatment that you receive by how you dress. We ask that all panel members dress professionally and come with fairness, a development mindset, engagement. We want to make sure that we are focusing on all of our values here as One Nova, right? We want to make sure that that is a part of it. And of course, know the code of conduct. So I want to encourage you, if you are new, make sure you go back to our website and read the code of conduct. I'll do speeches and classes from time to time, and I go really, really fast. I explain I'm taking an hour presentation. I'm throwing in 30 minutes. A lot of times we feel that way, especially around here, because there's so much you need to know. But you have to rehearse what you know. And part of that is reading the code of conduct so that when you hear something, you know what you're looking for. You don't want to come to one of these hearings and have no clue what you're talking about. And the best way for you to be prepared, that's really, I had a homiletics professor, and he used to always say, guys, it's time on a mountain. You know, if you're a skier or a snowboarder, you know what I'm talking about. You just get better by being on that mountain. Same thing. When you're sitting on a hearing board, you get better by knowing the code, reading it over a couple of times. So this is the part that for some of you, especially if you served here at Annandale, it's going to be a little bit different, okay? You're going to have a little bit more roles. For you who have served as a chairperson, this won't be that much different for you. But if you've never served before, you've served in a couple other roles, I encourage you to listen up. Okay, so what generally happens is the provost will appoint 3 members from the pool to serve on a hearing. So you usually get an email from the provost asking you to serve, and then you respond back with, absolutely. And so after you get that, we do the due process part for you. So behind the scenes, what happens is once I get your yes, we arrange a date that all of you agree to, and then we send the student an email. It's going to be on this date at this time at this location. And we do that based on our due process. And so if you ever notice, like, yeah, why does it seem to take a week? Our code of conduct dictates how many days a student of a conduct hearing. And generally, we do a couple of days out to make sure that they get the information and can respond back. Our standard of proof, this is something you want to make sure you know. This is going to be on the test. This is important. Our standard of proof is the preponderance of evidence. Big words to say than not. If you're a numbers guy, 51%. The technical term is 50% in the feather, 51%. So you may be thinking to yourself, Stephen, that, right? You may be thinking that because you're a Law and Order junkie like myself. As you're thinking, yeah, I've seen Law and Order. It's beyond a reasonable doubt, my friend, 95%. That is the court system. If you ever notice, they use different terms. They use guilty, not guilty. We use terms responsible, not responsible. So, you know, someone can be responsible for something. Doesn't necessarily mean they 100% did it. It means based on the information you have, we're going to hold you responsible for this. So we use a different standard. This is a standard that we use as NOVA. Of the evidence, 51%. Layman's terms, more likely than not. So when I'm looking at a case, after I've heard all the information, I say, is it more likely than not that X occurred? So if they're accusing them of cheating, is it more likely than not, based on the information I saw today? I need to be able to answer that question. Remember, more likely than not is 51%. Preponderance of the evidence is the other colleges use different standards, so make sure you're aware of that. But our college, NOVA, every campus at NOVA uses this standard. Some other standards would be clear and convincing, which is about 80%, and of course the court system, 95%. We don't use those 2 standards, okay? We use more likely than not, 51%. Administrative hearing officer, this is the conduct officer. This is the person who ensures that all the procedures are being followed. So that would be me here at Annandale. Okay, so I will be in there. I'm not a voting member. I'm just making sure the process goes supposed to go. Okay. The next you would have the facilitator. You know, this is the person who chairs. If you're here at Annandale, we always call you the chair. You're the person who is going to make sure it goes the way it's supposed to go. You read the script. You're the one who generally introduces the panel. You introduce yourself to the complainant and respondent. You basically regulate the structure of how it's going to go. So if you've served here at Annandale when it comes to chairperson, this is basically, you understand what I'm talking about. This is you. Now, this is something that is different if you've served at Annandale, the clerk. This is the faculty and staff member that makes sure that says, if you ever preach, this one, you get that moment in the back where you have like, you have 10 minutes left. Okay, you're that guy, you're that girl. You're the one who says, hey, we want to make sure that we stay on track. So we're going to give about an hour for this. And when it gets close to that hour is up, you're like, hey, start to try to wrap this up to the conclusion part so we can get to the part of deliberation. So that person is keeping the time. A example of how you can do that. This person is also a voting member, so that has not changed. Then we have the recorder. This person is generally our student. So, computing machines, right? And so we have the student use the recorder. We audio record all of our formal hearings. Student's responsibility is to click the record button to make sure that we are recording. I also remind you, if you ever have to take a break, stop button. You don't want to record the breaks. So if you ever say, hey, we gotta go to the restroom, we hit stop. Okay? Because if not, your personal conversation about football, professional wrestling, or Trump just got into your file. We don't necessarily want that. Also, the student, this is something new, they are also going to be transcribing what happens. Not only will you click record, you'll also be writing out, here's what's happening. And that's something new because since computer machines break sometimes, we don't want to just rely on technology. What happens if the battery in the recorder dies? What happens if you didn't click record? Of what happens as well. And so it's a fail-safe to make sure that we are serving our student population. Any questions about that?
So when you say transcript, is it more like an outline, or are they really responsible for writing out like everything?
Yes.
So the details. So it is a general outline of what the student has shared, what questions the panel members have asked, what the answer was that the student provided. So it's a general outline, and it can be shorthand. So it doesn't have to be the full question, but it has to be enough of the question where the reader of the transcript gets the gist. Yeah.
Yes.
Are the cases in the same place, or are they at different locations?
Great question. It's determined by the campus you're on. And so generally here at Annandale, we do them all here at Annandale. We generally do them in the Dean of Students office. But sometimes there's a situation in which we want to provide privacy for both students to participate. So we'll do it at another location as well. So we'll do it simultaneously. Sometimes we do those in Brault, the Brault building here on campus. Sometimes we'll do it, one person be at Brault, one person be at the CA building. But generally, it's always going to be here in Annandale. You will know the location. Before we move forward, yes.
I assume you don't record the deliberation.
Correct.
Okay.
That is still true. We do not record deliberation.
Not Axel, something.
But it is
It's part of the written transcript, but not the audio transcript.
Okay.
So the recorder is still writing away, but you hit stop.
But even in that process, you're not saying Kelly said this, Tom said this was our vote, this is what we decided, responsible, not responsible, here is the sanction as a group that we decided, this many people said they agree with this sanction, this many people said they didn't agree with the sanction. So it's still a general idea, questions, hopefully no yelling, but maybe some voices elevated because of some disagreement with what you may think about the case, but all of those types of details of the transcript.
So if you ever fill out one of the formal hearing forms here, it's basically the last part of the form in which you're writing out, we agreed 3-0, or we didn't agree 2-1, and so this was their concern. That's basically what this is.
Just for clarification for the recorder. The audio recorder is going to be detailed, but the writing is going to be just the outline.
As quick as your hand can go. Yeah.
All right.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I think I might have recalled this from a hearing panel that I served on. The question is, can someone bring, you know, like let's say a student, can a student bring someone in support? Or not necessarily a witness, but let's say, I say, well, look, you know, this is my sister and I want her to sit here. Can the panel allow that person to sit there and just, you know, sit in the room, or would that person need to sit outside?
Yeah, great question. That would be, according to our code of conduct, called an advisor. And every student has a right to bring one advisor. The advisor doesn't say anything during the meeting. They are there basically as a moral support to the student. And so that person can be their mother, their brother, their sister, or their lawyer. You gotta love that. But they all can be there. Every person's allowed at least one, or allowed one advisor. Correct. They can talk to the student, but they can't address you as a panel. And so generally the chairperson, they're aware and they know how to handle if someone gets out of control. Any other questions before we move forward? All right, so let's talk about reviewing and analyzing information. Identify and classify the information. So when you look at the information, we talked about this already: who, what, when, where, why, and how. I always say it this way: over. You should be able to tell me what happened without the person being there. If you can't do that, you need to ask more questions in your hearing. So if you're writing down notes or you're thinking about this case, if the person leaves, could you tell me from their side what happened? If there gets a point where you're like, oh, I got a little gap there, then you want to ask more questions. Of course, make sure you understand that the information you receive, like we're talking face to face, sometimes the student does not come to a hearing. That's okay, because some students provide statements for records. Some provide text messages, video. Not assume that a student does not care about the process because they didn't show up. We should make sure that we look at all the information that's provided before we make our decision.
Does that happen where a student just for whatever reason can't or won't show up, they send in enough information to try to prove their side of the fact?
Correct. That happens. And they're allowed to do that. A student can show up and say nothing. A student doesn't have to show up. A student can say, you know, I'm going to show up by telephone, or a student can say, I'm just going to submit all the information, and I want you guys to figure it out with the information I've submitted. So make sure that's one of those biases I've seen over the years that we need to really stick in our pocket and throw it way down there and get rid of it, because decision based on the information you have, and you want to make sure that that's how you're making your decision. So that's how you evaluate. You want to make sure you evaluate the relevance of each piece of information. So if they're talking about the professor gives you, hey, here's the link from Wikipedia, and it's exactly what they turned in, they just changed their name, the professor may not show up to the hearing. They may say, no, I've provided you this, I'm not coming. Don't assume because they didn't come, they don't care. And even if they didn't care, that's not necessarily your concern. Your concern is, did the student violate code of conduct? And can you prove that with 51%? We've already talked about criminal cases and how Nova PD, we work with Nova PD. We do also look at credibility of a student, because sometimes it is, I say it's art and a science. I say, oh, it's easy. But in reality, it is an art and a science. Sometimes you have two people and you're looking at the information. It seems 50-50. The credibility of the witness, or the student, I should say, okay, so we're like, hey, this guy lied to me 3 times during this hearing. It does say at the beginning of our script that a pattern of lying against you. And so you want to make sure that you are not only judging just the information you have, but the credibility, the source of where this information is coming from, especially when it's close. So that's why you are here. You are the ones who have the character that we've said, look, this person can really look at a situation, can be fair and balanced, and make tough decisions when it's necessary. And sometimes when you sit on the board, these are the tough decisions you have to make. All right, so we've talked about the standard. We have to remember it is majority vote. At the end of the hearing, what will happen is you will ask the students for their final words, the complaint, tell me, what would you like to see happen? Respondent, what would you like to see happen? Thank you for coming in today. You're dismissed. Here's where the fun begins. This is where, click the button on that recorder. It's now you're done. And then you talk with each other. You vote. Discuss what happened and why you feel the way you do. You deliberate. And we remember that it is majority vote. So you want to hear everybody, but you don't have to have all three of you agree. Once you vote, you just go to the next topic. So decisions are made by majority vote. We have to remember that when you're making your decisions, we have administrative sanctions and educational sanctions. So administrative sanctions are anything from warning to expulsion. So we have warning, we have probation, we have deferred suspension, and we have expulsion. And we give you that list and what each one of those terms mean. So you need to make, after you make a decision of responsible or not responsible, if you think they are responsible, you need to say, okay, well, what are we gonna give them? Anywhere from warning to expulsion. Then, because we're developmental, we also need to think, remember, they are both our students. We want all of our students to learn. What educational sanctions could be appropriate? So we give you a list of possible educational sanctions. Could be anything from an educational paper, community service, meeting with their academic advisor. Maybe you heard through their story. I've been at NOVA for 6 years. Maybe you need to talk to the advisor so we can get this student to finish their college goals. A research paper. Any of those options are options, but we want to make sure that we are always educational in what we do. And we want to make sure that we also give a justification. So we say, okay, this is a minor issue, which means it could be a warning. You explain, here's why we think this is a minor issue. Or let's say you say, we think this person should be suspended for a year. Why? You need to justify based on the code of conduct, based on what you heard, what made you think this person was responsible. You don't want to just say, oh, responsible, educational paper, done. You want to make sure you are clear on here is why the panel voted to this person to be responsible. And here's why we're giving this sanction. This is very, very important. Every time I go to a meeting or I go to a class, I always say this. This is America. The burden of proof rests on a complainant. You have to prove it, okay? Any Star Trek fans in here? Okay. On Deep Space Nine, there's a great episode in which the Cardassian is talking to the doctor, and he's talking about their culture, and he goes, so, tell me, how does your judicial system work? And he said, it's great. We have a celebration every time. He goes, oh, really? That much justice? Yeah, they're guilty every time. Because, yeah, doctor, the hearing's a formality. Don't you know? They're always guilty. We always get our man on Cardassia. It's like, this is not Cardassia. This is America. And in America, that whole idea of innocent until proven guilty, that's the same thing here. Remember, if I accuse you of stealing my watch, it is my responsibility to prove you stole my watch. It is not the responsibility of the person who you're accusing to prove they didn't do it. It's like someone saying, when did you stop beating your wife? It's like, wait. Never? All right, prove you never did it. It doesn't work that way. Same thing with anything that you hear. The person who's making a complaint, they have to convince you with a 51% preponderance of evidence that this event occurred. So if it's a professor saying that the student cheated, they have to show you, here's how. So when I turned them safe assign, it came up 89% worth, and here is the paperwork that goes with it. That may be good information. The student who's being accused, you must remember, they do not have to say anything during this process. Now, I've never sat in one where a student didn't say anything, but that is their right. Make sure you don't try to use their rights against them. Ability to prove they didn't do it, it's the responsibility of the complainant to prove it happened. So the burden of proof rests on the complainant. Did the complainant prove that the accused did it? Preponderance of evidence, which is not. That's our standard, 51%. Any questions about that?
What do you mean, don't use their right against them?
So if a student doesn't show up, either one, so let's say the complainant or the respondent doesn't show up, does that mean they're responsible or not responsible of the event? So sometimes in our, when we talked about biases earlier, sometimes our bias is if the person doesn't show up, they don't care. And if they don't care, well, they're responsible for it. It's not true. It's not true. Let's say they were going to show up and they got their car broke down. and they didn't think to call ahead. Or let's say they got the days confused. Well, but them showing up doesn't matter. So we don't use that against them. Or a student comes in and you ask them a question. Yes. And they say, I'm not going to answer that question. Well, it's not their responsibility to necessarily answer that question. That doesn't help them. Because if you say, well, your professor said you did this, this, and this, and here's the evidence. Could you help me understand it? And they go, you know, you're going to look at the information and weigh the information. But you have to remember, they have a right to come and say nothing. They have a right not to come at all. They have a right to just turn in written testimony against them and say, well, I personally like it when I'm speaking to someone face to face. So I'm going to go with this credibility, this witness more because I saw them. Make sure you weigh all the evidence based on what it is. Does that make sense? Okay. And we can flesh more of that out in more training. All right. So writing the deliberation report. All right. So if you've ever been a chairperson, you're used to this process. It must be typed. It must be submitted via email. Here at Andale, we do within 72 hours. You email it to the Dean of Students office. You just want to make sure all the information is accurate. So the names of the people you serve with on the panel, it's a good idea to get their names. Make sure the names of the people who are serving, like the complainant and respondent, their names are spelled accurately. The narrative of what happened, make sure that's accurate. So you just want to make sure that whatever you're turning in, it is to the best of your knowledge. And we will provide all those forms for you. So the great news is this for you, because all you do is you come, you sit, you listen. Okay, that was my big point earlier. We provide this documentation for you. You are part of the art. One who sits there and you listen. And this is why we have people do this, not machines, because we know there's always a human aspect to this process. That's why you're there. And so we provide the form so you can get it back to us. Any questions?
About the proof part.
Likely than not, 51%.
It's basically like if you have to prove that you didn't cheat it, the students they are prove it.
That's correct. They don't. Who has to prove they cheated? Right.
But then when, like, if the professor, let's say, no, I don't know how to say it. Let's say that person being confused with the other. Let's say I have an assignment in biology, and I did my assignment, but the other student copied from it and saying, "You are cheated," but he did not. He just, shared information.
He should probably share that part, and that may assist him. Because if he's sitting on a panel, you're the one who's going to be sitting on the other side of that table. And so if a student comes in and goes, "Oh no, I didn't cheat. I don't know how he got all my answers. He must have copied against me when I walked out and went to the bathroom. I don't know." And then you would sit on the panel, you would discern your heart. Is this person telling me the truth? And if you thought so, then when he gets to part of deliberation, you would say, "I actually believe him. I don't think he cheated. I think the other person cheated off him. I don't think they cheated together. I believe him. And here's why." That gut feeling of, well, I believe him because he had nothing to gain from it. He's doing great in the class. Professor says he's doing great in the class. The professor even said, yeah, he did go to the bathroom, so it's possible. He's more likely not telling us the truth. He didn't cheat. He's not responsible. But the other guy who copied this paper, I don't believe him that they just came up with magical answers that were the exact same. I think he's cheating. That's how that works. That's where the art form comes in. Other questions?